Okay, this should be a fairly fast video. Just looking at the changes I made to ourProbes Angular client to get it to support devices and probes, and the combination of devices and probes, what probes are running on what devices. And it's not going to be an Angular tutorial. I'll just be looking at kind of the major changes I made to get fblStarter running as ourProbes. One change I made to the architecture, so before I kind of had an SQL brain fart and had a separate store in here in Firestore for a collection of probe devices relationships. Didn't really need that, so I just put it under devices, which is more of a nosql approach, where the collection of probes that are running on the devices are just stored with the device. The change that made to my middleware architecture is I'm just looking for changes to devices or device documents in Firestore. So I'm looking for a device update and deciding whether the change is to the actual device, in which case I call one API to update IOT Core, or a different API to update the configuration for that particular device. So let's get going. I'm just going to mainly just walk through the client with a brief review of what I've added to the fblStarter. Okay, let's look at the application. I'm using the deployed version, so ourProbes.com. I've just gone to ourProbes.com. By default, it'll take you to log on. If you're not logged in, there's no splash screen, so I'm going to log in. And the home page in this case is uses a map to show what devices are set up where. I'm using maps mainly because I wanted to try out Google Maps and try out an application, but it is kind of useful with devices. The idea is, because these are cheap devices, they can be deployed to different locations to see different network capabilities from those locations. So the map's useful for seeing that, so you can do all the normal Google Map things, and I've sort of set up some test probes here. They're not real probes that are running in different locations, so you can get an idea of what that does for you. The main areas in this application are managing the devices, so I go to the device list. I can also get here from that home page as well. And let's go through what it's like creating a device. So I have to give it a device ID. Just showing how to put the device in. When I'm creating a new device, I've got to enter the key information. So see down here, the public key that gets deployed to the IOT Core when I create the device. Private key, this is more just informational, but I want to store it with the public key in the Firestore database for the device, and also the private key tuple, which is used in the actual ESP32 device to get a Java web token. So I'll keep all these together rather than trying to store them somewhere else. The idea is I have a different public-private key combination for every device, so if one device goes bad or someone steals the public-private key, I can just disable that one device and they won't have access to any other devices. So it does some pattern checking on these to make sure they look like a RSA key. Okay, that should be everything I need to create a device. So we've created that. Okay, so I've created that device 11. Location is in Sydney. And I can also, now it's been created, add any probes that should run on that device. So let me just select a couple. And our device should be all set up. If I go back up to home, zoom out to a world view again. So now we see that device 11 is shown as residing in Sydney. So once I start looking at the probe events coming in. I should be able to even color code these these device indicators on the map to show are they picking up all the probes, are they getting the results they expect. The other part of this is a way to manage probes. So same sort of thing, we go into a list of probes. I've got 3 test ones in here. If I create a new probe, I just need to give it a name. Probably a better name than this. Network target, so let's try and the type of probe it is. At the moment, Bing's the only one that's working down on the ESP32, so I select that, but you see I'm set up to enter other probe types. Whether the probe's active, I can create it. And now if I go up to my list of probes, I can see the probe I just created here. And also if I go up to my devices again, for D11, I now have that probe I just created available to add to that device, and it's added in. Show the changes I made from last time we looked at the Angular client. So I'm looking here at the Angular app module TS, which sort of shows you the main modules that have been added to the client. So I've added the reactive forms module because I want to use reactive forms. It made it easier to code the input screens using that. I've added this AGM core model, which is Angular Google Maps library, to make it easier to work with the Angular Google Maps. I added some material components, just a divider module, the forms field module, the expansion module, so I can expand and compress areas on the input screens. Select module, tabs module, input module, and also the components I wrote for this. So here you can see the additional components. I created devices component. So generally the way I set things up was to have a listing component, which is this devices component with the plural. Then off that I can select the device component where you actually edit the device. Same thing for probes. Probes component and then probe component combination. I did create another component called device list because I found I was listing out devices on both the home page and on the devices page. So rather than doing it twice, I just created a component to encapsulate that listing functionality. Created a component called simple map just to hang between the application and the mapping component. It just sort of simplified working with the map. And probably the last one here, this device probes component, where I list the probes for a device, allows you to select which probe to add or remove, and it returns a probe list when used on a page, and it really simplified the logic rather than throwing everything into the device component page by breaking out the device probes component and working on that separately. It just made it a lot easier to manage that code. So that's most of the changes that I've made to the application, the Angular application. That's about as far as I'll go with the Angular work, but you can follow this along in my GitHub repository if you really want to see what all the detailed code looks like.